Hello and welcome back to the Cave, and welcome to part 4 of the Airfix Bristol Blenheim build. This is the final part. We got there. So in the last video I kind of suggested the next part would be quite quickly afterwards, and yeah, that didn't happen. Sadly, due to I suppose limited bench time, and I was prioritizing actually building rather than doing video work. It's taken a little bit longer, but it's there. You know, the kit is finished, and in this part you're going to see how I get there. So where did we leave it last time? So last time we left it, it had been primed. This video will cover the paint stage, decaling, weathering, and the final bits and bobs of what is a rather enjoyable kit from Airfix. So thank you to everyone who's liked and subscribed so far. If you've not done so, give a like, give a subscribe. Well, maybe wait until the end of this video before you like it. Make sure that you actually do like it before you like it, if you know what I mean. As ever, sit back, put your feet up, relax, enjoy the next 30 minutes or so, and we'll get to the end, and I'll come back at the end and finish up with some final thoughts. So enjoy the video. See you later. So it's straight into the action. So in this first part I am going to get the camouflage colors done. So to help with that, I'm going to use basically the color call out from the kit, and photocopy them and scale them up to basically give me something I can cut out and use as a masking template. So the first part of that is I'm going to lay down the dark earth color. So I'm using Ammo's dark earth color from their RAF early World War II set. So as is the usual process for me, nice build up of the color, generally quite light passes, build up the color density as I need it. So in this case I'm not marking out the dark earth. I'm just going to paint the entire upper side in dark earth, and then I'm going to use the mask templates to use them as a basis then for the dark green. So at the start you saw me using some mats. So basically all I'm doing is I'm measuring the actual kit and measuring the color call out from the instructions and basically scaling it up to a 72nd scale plan. So this is the photocopied version, and I'm using a blade which has a swivel head on it, which helps me just go nicely round the camouflage line. So all I'm going to do is basically cut out all the parts that are in dark earth, and those will be used to create a masking pattern on the kit. In this case I've decided to use the paper directly. In some cases it does lift up a little bit, which gives you relatively softer edge. I mean, with this paper you could basically use this to lay across some masking tape and then cut out the masking tape and use that as a template. That would definitely give you a hard camouflage edge. But in this case, I suppose a medium hard edge, slightly soft edge, seemed to look okay. Not entirely accurate probably for RAF World War II aircraft, but looks good to my eye, so that's good enough for me. So yeah, so I'm just using some sections of masking tape just to help stick down that paper mask. I think this kind of approach probably reflects a little bit of the skin flint that I am as well. I'm sure there are probably actual vinyl cut masks or something available that you can use. I know a lot of people now do use vinyl cutters anyway to cut their own masks at home, so you could do that. But for me, this works just fine. So all I've done is take the original image from the instructions, scaled it up by 1.49%, 1.49 times the size. And basically that printed image comes out at approximately the 72nd scale size. And that means all these little cutout parts do fit. And of course, using the instructions, it also prints out the panel lines that are shown, so it gives you a good guide as to where to lay the individual parts. Of course, you don't get a completely perfect image, because of course it doesn't account for the 3D effects. It is just a 2D image, but it's good enough to give you that basis, and then I can use some masking tape to infill the bits that are missing. So I do this for the side profiles as well. Kind of gives you that basis of, either it's a demarcation line or, certainly where it wraps around the fin and in around the horizontal stabilizer at the back. And there we go. That's pretty much it all masked. And in fact, yes, I think it is masked because I'm having my cup of coffee. So there we go, and it's off over to spray booth again, this time with the dark green. And once again, I can just build that dark green colour up nice and slowly. I've got a good, reasonably well defined masked area. And again, it's ammo dark green I'm using from the same World War II RAF early set. So I do find this particular dark green from ammo, I actually think it's a little bit light in colour. Maybe that's just comparing it to other dark greens that I've used in the past, but it does look a little bit too light to my eyes. I think on the Blenheim it's come out okay, but I think where I've used it before it's looked far too light green. But overall, I'm reasonably happy with it. So now that that's had a few minutes to dry, it's on to the couple of minutes of activity just to remove those masks. So upon removing them, for me, I'm absolutely delighted with the finish that's come out with that. It's I suppose, a sufficiently sharp demarcation line. Not perfectly hard edged, but certainly spot on for what I'm looking for. So as is always the case, it's just that careful removing of the masking, trying to make sure you don't lift any paint. Working with these acrylics, probably only left them probably an hour or so. Certainly the dark earth was only on an hour or so before I went on to do the green, so it can be still quite fragile. So caution is needed. So now it's on to the underside. So the call out is for black, but you don't really want black. So what I've done is I've used some Vallejo Model Air black and I've mixed it with some white. So it's a very, very, very dark grey. And I'm just working through, just kind of building up the colour, not laying it down in kind of thick, consistent layers. I kind of want a little bit of colour variation. As I'm watching the playback, I'm realising I really should have had a cap on that cup. I think I was so lucky I didn't spill paint all over that model, because I can see it splashing about in that colour cup, and that is really, really beginning to bug me. Oh dear, that's just my inner monologue coming out. As ever, good advice, use the cap that comes with the Apex. It'll make sure your paint doesn't spill. So for the demarcation between the camouflage and the black, I'm actually just freehanding it. It's a little bit of a soft edge, probably softer than it actually was, but I don't know, it kind of looked okay to me and looked the part, so I was happy enough to do it that way. So as you can see, the black is not quite black, it's noticeably a little bit lighter. I'm also spraying it on in a relatively kind of patchy speckled approach, so at least there is a little bit of kind of color variation with some areas not covering the grey primer as much as others. So all that's given probably another hour or two to dry, and then let's go back and do some of the other areas that need to be done. So one of the first is to get the kind of burnt metal, gunmetal color around the engine cowlings. So I'm doing that with some ammo gunmetal at relatively low pressure. So here I'm just using a piece of stock card, basically to act as a masking shield, saves you masking the entire airframe. So for inside the flaps, they are painted in extra acrylics interior green. So all those paints went down relatively trouble-free. And this is one area where I did have a little bit of a problem. So as you can see, I managed to pull up some of the black paint, which also took some of the primer with it. So I'll correct that during this stage. So this is where I'm using some very, very thin Vallejo Model Air Black, just to add some color differentiation. So basically to post shade the panel lines. I've also used that to fill in the bits that got pulled up by the masking tape. For which there's probably a couple of reasons. I didn't need to paint very long to cure. Plus I think this is one of the few models where I didn't actually wipe it down with alcohol before painting, so that was a bit of an error on my part, because that's normally what I do. So the post shading color, I'm adding a little bit to the top surface as well, just to add a little bit of color variation and shading to dark earth and dark green. Just picking out some kind of key areas where I think that needs to be added, just to break up that kind of visual surface a little bit. So all in all, pretty happy with how that's gone down. So that's all the main painting, basic painting completed. So next up, it's adding the decals. So Airfix have not included a huge amount of decals for this. So there's two options in the box, and one is the REF scheme that I went for, but there's not a huge amount of decals to do on that. Just the main markings, serial numbers, etc., and a couple of small decals for the underside. So in recent years, Airfix's decals have performed pretty well, and these ones are no exception. They go down pretty well. They're a little bit thick, so they do take a little bit of working with the UMP decal setting solutions, just to get them to bed down into the panel lines. And I will go back later once they've set a little bit to kind of slice through the panel lines with a scalpel blade, and then add some more setting solution, and that will get them basically to sink into those panel lines perfectly. So it's the usual process for decals for me. There's some warm water just off to the left. Decals are soaked in it for 15-20 seconds. They come straight off the backing paper. Plus the warm water helps to soften them. I seem to find that they're less brittle when you use warm water, which makes them easier to manipulate, certainly around any curved areas. And then it's the use of microset, microsol, and then the UMP setting solution. So the normal and the strong, I think, are the two I've used on this occasion. So once those decals are nicely set, I'm going to use some Alclad Aqua Gloss, which is a nice acrylic gloss. Relatively quick drying, provides a good kind of basis for doing any weathering later on. So I'm pretty much applying one medium wet coat. So the top side is done. It's given about 20 minutes to kind of flash off, and then I can handle the kit gently to turn it over and do the bottom side. So really it's just a medium wet coat. I wouldn't say it's a high gloss finish, but it's certainly a useful utility gloss to allow the weathering washes to work. So in this case I'm using Ammo's Dark Wash, I think it is, which I suppose I'm a little bit surprised I went with that. Normally for the kind of dark green, you kind of go with I suppose a darker brown shade often works quite well. But decided, because the panel lines are actually quite fine on this Airfix kit, I thought, well, we'll just go with a standard dark wash. So it's kind of the usual process. Just run it into all those panel lines, let the capillary action take its course, and pull the wash along the panels. So I do find with the Ammo washes particularly, they are pretty quick drying. They do tend to be workable for quite a long period of time, even after they're dried. And that does offer some good benefits. I'm using some Winsor Newton Sansador. So I'm using that with a long brush now, just to manipulate those areas where I've added the wash, just to try and blend the areas a little bit, so it's not just a straight kind of dark wash line in the panel line and then straight into the base coat. I'm just trying to blend those colors in a little bit using some Winsor Newton. Once that's been given a little bit of drying time, and then using a piece of kitchen towel just to try and wipe down any excess areas, and just, I suppose, bring it back to the base color a little bit. I do find with this, essentially what you're left over with is a little bit of a kind of staining effect around the panel lines. That seems to work quite well. Some specific areas I'll kind of go back and clean up a little bit more using a cotton bud, again with some Sansador on it. So for the underside, I'm using Humbrol's wash, which is, I think it's the dust wash. I think for me, I think the Humbrol washes have kind of run their course. I do tend to find that they're very much like a very, very thin paint. Once they're down, if they're left to dry too long, they're very hard to move, certainly with Sansador. And using anything stronger, I tend to find risks certainly attacking the clear coat underneath. But I think with these, as long as you, I suppose, get to them while they're still relatively wet, you can manipulate them. So I was aiming for a reasonably subtle kind of dust effect on the underside. So I didn't really want a very kind of strong contrast, just enough to suggest that the panel lines are there and that they've accumulated dirt and dust from operations. So again, I'm using the same kind of liner brush to kind of highlight and pick out those areas, using a little bit of odorless thinners just to help me clean up the areas that I want to move the paint from, or the wash from in this case. And overall, it is getting to a reasonably subtle effect. It's not quite as harsh as it probably could be. But I think in future, I think I'm going to look at some different washes. I'm just finding the Humbrol ones are not the easiest to work with. But I've had them for years and I don't like wastage, so I'll try and use them when I can. But I think maybe they've run their course. But I think in this instance, I'm getting the desired effect, so I think I'm reasonably happy with how that's turned out. So those enamel washes are given quite a few hours to dry. It's probably actually the next day that I've come back to it. So now I'm just trying to add some, I suppose, emphasis on the exhausts. So I'm using some of the ammo shaders, which I believe are essentially a diluted ink. So I've used a mixture of light grey and grime, just to try and kind of highlight where those exhaust areas are on the underside of the Blenheim. I think a little bit later on I end up going back to use a little bit of a heavier effect. So here I'm just using a cotton bud, I think in this case with a little bit of water, just to refine kind of where those exhaust marks are. I'm also doing a little bit of blending on so some of the weathering applied to the walkway, because that would have been a reasonably heavy traffic area. So I think in this instance I'm using some UMP water-based washes just to add some dirt effects here and there on the airframe. So it's quite a mixture of different kind of weathering products that I've used this time. Once I'm happy with all those effects, so I'm going back to use Vallejo polyurethane matte varnish to give everything a coat and get everything completely sealed in. You know, I thinned it 50-50 with UMP acrylic thinners, and it seems to perform quite well. It seems to give a reasonably matte surface, not the mattest of matte surfaces, but you know, certainly happy enough with how well it comes out. So the top side's given about 10-15 minutes to flash off and dry, and then reasonably okay to handle the model at that stage, because I tend not to do very heavy coats, and then apply that matte coat to the underside. It's interesting at this stage, I think I realised that I've missed weathering, certainly inside the flaps and the bomb bay, but I'll go back and address that later. So the walkway is one area where I wasn't entirely happy with kind of how it looked. It didn't give quite the effect of a kind of well-travelled area. So here I'm attempting to use some ammo oil brushers. So I think I've got like a clay and an earth colour. Just using some odorless thinner, some Sansador again, and a couple of dots of the oil brusher. Just trying to manipulate that with the thinners. Just again, I suppose the effect I'm looking for is not so much that distinct kind of different coloration, and I'm not trying to make it look like mud, but more like a staining effect. So at the moment, I'm just kind of moving the colors around. I mixed two of the colors to give some color variation in there. And just doing that to get to the point where essentially I can wipe most of it back off again. And that's exactly what I'm doing here, just using a cotton bud with some odorless thinners, just to wipe down the areas that are a little bit too heavy and just leave more of a, I suppose, an indication of dirt and grime. So probably, I think I've probably taken off probably a bit more than I maybe wanted to. But I've never really worked with oil paints before in this context, so this was a little bit of an experiment. To naked eye, it's left a little bit of a kind of subtle staining in the area, so it kind of does what I needed it to do. So for the areas of mist, I'm going back and using UMP water-based wash. So I'm using dark dirt to add essentially a panel line wash to the inside of the flap area. And also that'll go on the inside of the bomb bay. So I have to say I do like the UMP washes. They are very easy to work with, very easy to clean up. So essentially you put them down, give them some drying time, and then you can just use water with cotton bud or a brush just to manipulate and move them around or remove them from the areas you don't want them. So the only time they're difficult to use is with a matte surface. It's not even they're difficult to use, they can just leave some staining behind. So you kind of need to be prepared for that. But I think that's true of pretty much any weathering wash. So here I am, cotton bud, using some essentially tap water and that helps me remove the excess from the areas that I don't want it. So because I'm trying to get right into the crevice of the flap area, I'll end up using a brush with some water on it as well, just to help me manipulate that wash. I had also applied some grey UMP wash. I think it's actually concrete colour, basically to add a little bit more kind of effect to the exhaust staining. Didn't come out as well as I expected, but there we go. So here I'm using some UMP light dirt, I think it is, just to add some effect to the landing gear doors, basically to simulate the effect of kind of mud. Actually, I think it's mud that I'm actually using to give that effect of some mud. I'm also using that a little bit on the brush and just using a splattering technique just to add a few dots of kind of mud here and there on the underside. So once I'm happy with all that, I can go back in with fine scalpel and finally get that masking off of the window area, the canopy area. So there's quite a few individual pieces to remove. A little bit of care, just use the scalpel to lift the corner and then the tweezers to pull it away cleanly. So there's a couple of little spots that need a little bit of cleanup, where a certain amount of overspray has gotten in, where the mask is lifted, obviously. But overall, that's come out with a good result. And then finally, it's on to, I suppose, adding all the final bits and pieces. So the landing gear, which was done ages ago, can finally be installed. So that's using a little bit of CA glue. There is a little bit of manipulation to get those to fit in properly, but once they're in, they're an absolutely spot-on fit. So that's the same on both left and right-hand gears. I think the only criticism I've had of this area is that the wheels, essentially you have to pry the main landing gear apart to get the wheels to slot in. And given that the wheels are weighted, there's no positive locating features, so it'd be very easy to have them in the wrong position. So essentially I'm setting the model down like that and then coming back with a bit of CA glue. So the other bits and pieces that get added are the Bombay doors. I think this is one area where I was a little bit lazy and didn't bother removing the pin injection marks. It's on the underside. It's probably not really going to be seen, so I'm not too worried about it. And then finally there's the propellers. Today again were done ages ago. The hubs have been painted with gunmetal or steel, and then the tips on in yellow. So there is an aerial that stretches from, or an aerial wire that stretches from the aerial over the middle of the fuselage up to the tail. So I'm using some ammo rigging. I think it's the medium rigging. So just got a little bit of CA glue on the tip of the aerial. Got the wire, the rigging in the tweezers, and on the little purple micro brush, I've got some accelerator for the CA. So literally just touch the rigging to the area that's got CA glue. Grab a little bit of accelerator. Just quickly dab it on the area. And within seconds, that CA will cure. And hopefully it'll come out visible in the final video. But there is an aerial wire running. Nice and taut because it's elastic thread, so you can stretch it a little bit. And it comes out absolutely perfect. Yeah, really happy with that. So last little bit of job, I'm going to use some UMP mud again, just to add a little bit of mud in around the main wheels. Just to let it wash in around, add a little bit of effect of mud and dirt in that area. So at this stage, I'm pretty much thinking I'm done and finished. And then I realized I'd missed one item. And that's the lens cover for the light on the wing. which I almost completely forgot about, and luckily enough it was still in the box. Otherwise I'd be coming up with some kind of other solution. So that's a little bit of a tight fit, but I'm reasonably happy with it. So there we go. That's pretty much done and dusted. So the keen observers amongst you will notice that my cutting mat has changed. Started this color, went black, and came back to this color. So that's because my good buddy Norman pointed out that the black was a little bit hard on the eyes. Made it difficult to see what was going on, and it was a good point. I'll take that on board, and we'll go back to this one. But I'm just looking at the model, quick scan over it, and I think I'm happy with that. Yeah, I'm happy with that. That's been a good little build. So let's have a look at some of the photos and see how it came out. So I think there's a few areas where there are things I would have done differently a little bit, tried a little bit different techniques, but I am very, very happy with this. So let's go back to me for a final wrap up. So that's it. That's the Blenheim completed. Yeah, so if you've sat through that, thank you, of course. Please give a like now if you like the video. Please give a subscribe, drop a comment if you want. Let me know what you think about modelling, what you think about stuff in general. Yeah, if you want, why not? So yes, Airfix over the years, they've gotten a lot of bad press. I think certainly stuff through the 80s and 90s could be pretty ropey from Airfix. Some of their 2010 onwards offerings have been hit and miss in some areas. Some have been good, some have been some horrible trench marks for panel lines. But this Blenheim, I have to say, yeah, I'm reasonably well impressed. Goes together okay. A few little minor issues. And stuff like panel lines actually quite well restrained, nice width, nice depth, give a good effect with a little bit of a panel wash even in 72nd scale. So yeah, I have to admit I've been reasonably happy with this kit. I think halfway through it, that's why I went out and bought the Bristol Beaufort from Airfix as well, so that's there in the stash. That'll go well with the Blenheim at some point. And yeah, I've really enjoyed building this kit. There are things that didn't quite go as well. I think probably with the limited time I had available, I felt a little bit of pressure to kind of get it done at the end, and there's probably a little bit of rushing, particularly in the weathering stage, which I often do anyway. It's almost like I get towards the end and you get a little bit excited and you want to get finished, and you kind of push it through a little bit too quickly. So yeah, there's a few little things there I should really work on. I think the panel wash stuff is fine. A few other bits and pieces in the weathering I was happy with. The exhaust staining I'm not particularly happy with. Particularly when you've got a kind of black underside, that it can be done a little bit better. So, but I'll talk about that in the next kind of bench update when we do a review of June, because we're now in July and June is done. So that'll be probably the next video, and hopefully quite soon, depending on time available. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Usual like and subscribe stuff. So thank you everyone, and we'll see you in the next video.